The stepfather did it, and she stayed silent. Until one day. A story that will make you rethink the meaning of silence. Like the video and subscribe. More stories like this are coming soon. The bus wheezed to a stop at the edge of the empty road, its rusted frame creaking as if exhaling relief after the long ride through dust and silence. There was no station, no platform, just a crooked sign half swallowed by weeds and a leaning wooden bench under a sagging awning. From the middle row stepped down a thin girl in a gray hoodie 2 sizes too large. Her name was Emma. She was 11 years old, though her posture and the way she carried her silence made her seem older, or perhaps just worn down by things children shouldn't know. Her sneakers hit the dirt without sound, her suitcase trailing behind her like a tired animal. She didn't look back at the driver or wave goodbye. Her eyes scanned the empty lot until they settled on a man standing at the far end of the station, if it could be called that. He was tall, lean, with hands folded behind his back, dressed in a pale shirt and work pants that had known decades of sun and rain. His name was Walter, her grandfather. "She's here," he said softly, as if confirming it to no one in particular. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a hug. He just nodded once, turned, and walked toward the old truck parked nearby. Emma followed without a word. The pickup truck coughed to life after a few hesitant attempts. The ride from the station to the house was filled with dry fields and sagging barbed wire fences. Crows watched from telephone poles. The desert air seemed to whisper things neither of them wanted to say. Emma kept her gaze fixed on the window, her hands clutching the frayed strap of her backpack. "You hungry?" Walter asked after a long stretch of silence. She shook her head. The question withered in the air between them. Walter didn't push. He hadn't lived with children in decades, and he knew enough to recognize when a child had forgotten how to answer simple kindness. They reached the house just as the sun dipped behind the hills. It was a 1-story wooden structure with peeling white paint, surrounded by dry grass and 3 apple trees that no longer bore fruit. The porch sagged at the center. A large, old dog lay curled on the welcome mat. He lifted his head, barked once, then settled back down as if deciding the girl didn't count as a stranger. Walter led her inside. The house smelled of cedar, dust, and something faintly metallic, like old coins. The living room had only a worn couch, a shelf of books, a grandfather clock that hadn't ticked in years, and a faded photograph on the wall. Emma recognized her father in it, a younger version, standing beside Walter, both of them smiling with the easy confidence of people who believed time wouldn't touch them. "Your room's upstairs," Walter said. "Used to be your mother's." Emma nodded and dragged her suitcase toward the staircase. Her footsteps were feather-light, as though she feared waking something that had been asleep too long. Upstairs, the room was small but clean. A narrow bed, a dresser, a window that overlooked the yard. She unpacked nothing. She just sat on the bed, hands in her lap, staring at nothing. Dinner was mashed potatoes and overcooked eggs. Walter ate slowly in silence. Emma picked at her food, barely taken 3 bites before murmuring a thank you and retreating to her room. As she turned, Walter saw the edge of a bruise peeking out from beneath her sleeve. He said, "Nothing." Not because he didn't notice, but because he wasn't sure his voice would hold steady if he did. That night, Walter sat on the porch with a mug of tea, watching the stars fight their way through the thick clouds. Inside the house, the lights were out, but then came a sound, quiet, almost imperceptible, a breath caught in the throat, a sob that wasn't allowed to become a cry. It was the sound of a child teaching herself not to need anyone. Walter gripped his cup tightly. It wasn't pity he felt. It was the heavy, helpless fury of someone who recognized a pain too close to one he had once known. The next morning, Emma was already awake when Walter stepped outside. She was sitting on the porch steps, a small notebook on her knees, sketching with a pencil so short it had to be held between two fingers. He watched from the doorway. On the page was a bird in a cage. The cage door was wide open, but the bird wasn't flying out. "That bird don't want to leave?" Walter asked. Emma shrugged. "Doesn't know if it's safe out there." Walter didn't know what to say. He only nodded, sat beside her, and watched the wind ruffle the page. Later that afternoon, while searching for an old book, Walter reached under the couch cushion and found a crumpled piece of paper. The handwriting was sharp, rushed, feminine. "You're the reason he lost everything. If you say anything, you'll have nowhere left to go." Walter's jaw clenched. The paper trembled in his hands. He had lived too long ignoring questions that had no answers. But now, one sat across the hall from him, drawing caged birds. That night, he knocked softly on Emma's door. She opened it just a crack. "I won't ask you anything you're not ready to say," he said, "but if you ever want someone to walk with you toward the truth, I'll be there." Emma didn't speak, but after a moment she nodded, the smallest, most fragile motion. Then she closed the door and he remained there for a while, not moving, feeling, perhaps for the first time in years, that the house was no longer completely empty. In the days that followed, Emma fell into the rhythm of the countryside. She fed the chickens, helped water the garden, sat beside Walter on the porch without speaking. She didn't flinch anymore when the screen door slammed or the old clock rang, but she also didn't laugh. Her drawings became more detailed, more haunting. People without faces, shadows stretching longer than their bodies. On the fourth day, Walter found her standing at the window, staring out at the trees. "You okay?" She didn't turn around. "I think I remember something." He waited. "There was fire," she said, "a house, someone walking away from it, a man, and a woman behind him." She was smiling, but she held gasoline. Walter stepped closer gently. "A dream?" Emma shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe not." That night, Walter sat at the kitchen table, his old diary open before him. He wrote, "She doesn't remember with words. She remembers with images, and what she's remembering scares her. Someone drove my boy to the edge. Maybe he fell. Maybe he jumped. But someone made sure no one was there to catch him." He stared at the family photo for a long time. Then he closed the notebook. The next morning, Walter gathered a stack of old documents, a broken watch, and a letter, one his son had written shortly before he vanished. After breakfast, he put a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Do you want to find out what really happened to your dad?" She looked up at him, no fear, just a long silence. Then she nodded once. "Yes," she said, "but I don't want guesses. I want the truth." Walter smiled faintly. "Then we go." The morning sun was already high when Walter finished tying down the tarp in the truck bed. 2 large cardboard boxes sat inside, one with old documents, the other with supplies for the trip. Emma stood on the porch, her backpack hanging loosely from her shoulder, the strap frayed but strong. She clutched her sketchbook like a lifeline. There was no fear in her eyes now, just a quiet purpose that had replaced the fog she'd arrived with. Walter handed her a water bottle and opened the passenger door. She climbed in silently, glancing once at the old house as if sealing a chapter. Buck barked once from the porch and lay back down as the truck rolled down the dusty road. The countryside stretched endlessly ahead of them. Emma sat with her knees tucked up, sketching while the engine rumbled. She wasn't drawing birds this time. She was drawing people. Faceless ones, shadows at boardroom tables, and one particular figure she placed in the center. A tall man in a red tie standing with his back to her. It was the first time she tried to draw the man her memories only hinted at. They reached the city in the evening. It was loud and metallic, filled with honking cars and blinking signs. The motel was small and plain, a boxy structure with peeling blue paint and a sign that buzzed at night. Their room had one bed, a cracked ceiling fan, and a window that overlooked a parking lot full of dust and silence. Emma said nothing about the room. She sat by the window, flipped to a new page in her sketchbook, and drew the countryside they had just left, the porch, the apple trees, and a girl sitting alone with a pencil in hand. Walter returned from a nearby store with bread, cheese, and a newspaper. The front page displayed a headline that made his hands still for a moment. Jensen Group announces major expansion plan. The article mentioned the name Jensen repeatedly, his daughter-in-law's last name. He folded the paper slowly and set it on the table. Emma opened her laptop and began searching. She typed in Jensen Group, scrolled through company records, executive profiles, archived blog posts. Her fingers moved with determination, but her eyes scanned everything with quiet restraint. She found a blog post written years ago by a former employee, one of the early marketing interns. The post had a photo, her father standing beside a tall man in a sharp suit. Below it, a caption read, "The man behind the fastest merger of the year." Emma pointed at the screen. "That's him. He was my dad's best friend. Then he became vice president right after Dad disappeared." Walter leaned in. The resemblance to a man from the family albums was undeniable. "No one climbs that fast without stepping on someone," Walter murmured. That night, Emma arranged a wall of notes on the motel wall using tape and Post-its. She pinned up printed screenshots, timelines, photos, and little handwritten questions in red ink. When did the transfer happen? Why no press on disappearance? Why was Dad declared inactive without investigation? She taped 2 photos side by side, one of her father smiling at a company event, and one of the red-tied man at the same podium just 2 weeks later. Underneath she wrote, "Too soon to be unprepared." The following day, they visited the old office building where her father had once worked. It towered above them like a glass monolith, untouched by the dust of truth. Emma stared up at it with narrowed eyes. "Are you sure you want to go in?" Walter asked. She tightened the straps of her backpack. "I want them to see me." She entered alone, moving through the lobby like someone who had memorized its corners. At the reception desk, she gave a name. The woman behind the desk hesitated, typed something, and made a call. After 15 minutes, Emma was led into a small, sleek conference room. Inside stood 2 people, the man from the photo, now older, sharper, and her former stepfather, wearing a gray suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, if it isn't the little stray," he said, "found your way back to civilization." Emma didn't respond. She placed her bag on the table and sat down. The man laughed. "You've got your father's stubborn silence. He never knew when to shut up either." Then came the other voice. Her stepfather, now the CEO. "Still digging for your daddy's bones?" "He left, Princess. Just couldn't handle losing." Emma stared at him, hand in her pocket. The recorder was there, a small red button under her thumb. She pressed it slowly, discreetly. "You don't belong here," he continued. "You never did. And your father, he signed away everything before disappearing like the coward he was." His words were sharper now. "He was a fool, couldn't handle the heat, and he left you because of it." Emma stood and said nothing. She walked out of the room, holding the recorder in her pocket. Walter waited across the street, leaning on the truck. When she reached him, she looked up, her eyes no longer hollow. "They said everything," she whispered, "and I caught it all." That night in the motel room, they played the recording. Her stepfather's voice was clear, his mockery unmistakable. Walter sat still as the words unfolded. When it ended, Emma looked down. "He said Dad was afraid of losing me, that I made him weak." Walter reached for her shoulder. "No," he said firmly, "you're the reason your father fought as long as he did." The next day, Walter made a call to an old friend, a retired engineer who used to work in the Jensen Group's audit department. His name was Griffith. When they met, Griffith opened the door and studied Emma's face before letting them in. "Ben's girl," he said softly. "I knew you'd come one day." Over mugs of lukewarm coffee, he pulled out a thin folder from his shelf. Inside were old financials, signatures, project files. "This here," he said, pointing at a signed stock transfer agreement, "is not your father's signature. I prepared every deal he ever did. This one's fake." Emma studied the curves of the pen strokes, the way the final letter curled too far. "Forged?" she asked. Griffith nodded slowly. "Or done under pressure." That night, back at the motel, Emma pinned the copy of the signature next to the letter she had found in the couch at Walter's house. Same threats, same timing. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window, reading through every page of her father's lost notebook. The last page was hurried, the ink smudged. "If they take me, no, it's not because I gave up. I'm just out of time." Emma pressed the notebook to her chest. "I think I know where he went," she whispered. The next morning, she handed Walter a drawing, a small building with a tin roof, a trellis of flowers, low hills in the background. "I don't know why, but this place feels real." Walter stared at the image, then paled. "That's El Camino Diner, in a border town called Las Pedras." Emma looked at him with steady eyes. "Then that's where we go next." The road to Las Pedras was long and coated in a fine film of red dust that clung to the windshield and the corners of Emma's backpack. They drove for hours along Highway 20, where the sun blazed so hard that the horizon shimmered like water. Walter didn't talk much. His eyes stayed locked on the road, hands firm on the steering wheel. Emma sat beside him with her sketchbook closed on her lap, the drawing of the diner facing upward, as if guiding them. The farther they went, the more the landscape shifted, flatlands giving way to low hills and clusters of sunburnt buildings. By late afternoon, the sign appeared like a memory coming to life. El Camino Diner. Just like in the picture. Faded white paint. A crooked wooden sign. A bench out front beneath a rusted awning. Emma leaned forward, heart racing. "That's it, Grandpa," she said, her voice almost breathless. Walter pulled over across the road and turned off the engine. The wind hit them as soon as they stepped outside. It was hot and dry, tasting of rust and gravel. Emma led the way, walking with the surety of someone stepping into something long overdue. The bell above the diner door jingled weakly. Inside, a few customers lingered at booths, sipping from glass mugs, reading folded newspapers. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged woman wiping the surface with a rag. At the stove was a man with a long beard, sun-darkened skin, and tired eyes that held a weight too familiar to ignore. He turned when the door opened. His gaze landed on Emma first, then Walter. For a moment, no one moved. Then Walter stepped forward, voice low and brittle. "Ben." The man froze. His hands dropped to his sides. His mouth opened, then closed. He blinked slowly, and something broke through the surface of his silence. "Father." It came out hoarse, barely a whisper. Emma didn't speak. Her legs carried her forward on their own. She stood in front of him, staring up into the face she had drawn over and over again without knowing. His beard was longer, his eyes sadder, but she knew. She knew. Ben knelt in front of her. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought disappearing was the only way to protect you. Every day since, I've wished I could take that back." Emma didn't cry. Not yet. She just reached out and touched his arm, as if checking that he was real. "You let them win," she whispered. He nodded, and in his eyes was the kind of pain that never learned to heal. "I thought if I left, they'd stop hurting you. I didn't know they'd only try harder." They sat outside the diner later under the shade of the overhang. Walter said nothing. He just watched his son and granddaughter, the silence between them now filled with something whole. Ben told them everything. After he refused to sign over the final shares of the company, his business partner, now the CEO, and Emma's stepfather began cornering him with legal threats. They claimed he had committed fraud. They staged conversations, planted documents, manipulated the board. But the worst part, Ben said, was the day Emma's mother came to him and said, "She's better off without you. If you disappear, maybe they'll back off." "I believed her," he said. "I thought I was doing the right thing." He leaned forward, hands shaking slightly. "But every day I stayed away, I stopped believing it." Emma finally spoke. "You wrote that you heard them talking about the border, about something final." Ben nodded. "I thought they'd try to make it look like an accident. I didn't run, I just hid. So they couldn't use me against you." Walter reached into his bag and pulled out the tape recorder. "We have their words, their voices." Emma got them to talk. Ben's eyes widened. "You went back?" Emma nodded. "They didn't see me coming." He leaned back, overwhelmed. "I can't believe you did that. I can't believe I left you alone to do it." She looked him in the eyes then. "You didn't leave me alone. You just made me figure out how to survive. And now I want more than that. I want the truth to matter." That night, the three of them stayed in a small rented room behind the diner. There were only 2 beds. Walter slept in a chair. Emma lay awake, listening to her father's breathing. It was uneven, not from sleep, but from memories. She got up and sat by the window. Outside, the hills looked softer under the stars. She opened her sketchbook and began to draw, not from imagination this time, but from life. A man, standing in front of a diner, his hand resting on a young girl's shoulder. Behind them, a third figure held a map. All 3 faced the same direction. The next morning, Ben sat at the table with his old notebook. Walter had given it back to him. He turned the pages slowly, reading words he had written in fear. "I was drowning, and I thought letting go was better than dragging her down." Emma sat across from him. She didn't interrupt. When he closed the book, he looked at her. "I have no right to ask for anything." "I don't need you to ask," she said. "I just need you to be ready to finish what you started." They recorded his story in full. He spoke into the recorder about the night he was forced to sign forged documents, about the legal threats, the pressure, the betrayal. He named names, dates, places. Emma wrote everything down as he spoke, her handwriting fast and sharp. Walter watched her from the corner. He saw her hands steady, her face still. He saw his granddaughter no longer afraid to stand in the light. Later that day, they prepared to leave. The next part wouldn't happen here. The truth had to be taken back to the place it was buried. Emma packed her sketchbook, the recorder, and her father's notebook into her backpack. Before leaving, she drew one last picture in the margins of the page. A caged bird, now perched on a windowsill, wings spread. The cage sat open behind it, forgotten. "Are you ready?" Walter asked. Emma looked at both of them, her grandfather and her father. "I've never been more ready." The city looked different this time. Not colder, not louder, just clearer. Emma sat in the passenger seat of Walter's borrowed truck with the window slightly down, letting the wind hit her face as if it could carry away the last pieces of fear. Her father was driving now, his hands firm on the wheel, knuckles white. He hadn't said much since they left Las Pedras. Words seemed too weak to match what was waiting ahead. Walter sat in the back seat, arms folded across his chest, watching both of them as if afraid to blink. Emma had the tape recorder in her lap and her sketchbook in her backpack. The confession was stored safely in multiple copies, one hidden at the bottom of her bag, one on a USB drive taped under the passenger seat, and one in Walter's sock drawer at the motel. She had learned. Truth alone wasn't enough. It had to be protected. They returned to the same motel near the city's market district. The room hadn't changed. Same ceiling fan, same chipped window frame, but something in the air had shifted. This time, they had a voice. This time, they had facts. While Ben stayed behind to rest, Emma and Walter visited a local law firm run by an old friend of Walter's, a woman named Helen Ray. She had once worked on state-level fraud cases and now handled whistleblower accounts. She listened to the recording in silence. Her expression didn't change until the moment the slap hit. Then she looked up at Emma. "You stayed in that room after that?" Emma nodded. "I wasn't done yet." Helen clicked off the recorder and leaned back in her chair. "This is more than enough to begin. If this goes to court with corroborating documents, there's not only corporate fraud here. There's abuse, intimidation, forced disappearance. It's a web, and you just found the thread." That night, Emma refused to appear in front of cameras. A local reporter had heard rumors about the tape and contacted Walter, but Emma shook her head. "I don't want to be the story. I want the truth to be." So Walter met the reporter instead and handed over the copy with one condition: no names. Not yet. The next morning, the news spread like wildfire. Financial blogs picked up the leak first. Then, local news ran the headlines. Anonymous girl exposes corporate corruption inside Jensen Group. Within 24 hours, the voices from the tape echoed across the internet. The CEO's mocking laughter, his open admission of betrayal, the slap, the silence that followed. And then Emma's calm voice. "Thank you. Now I have more than your words." At headquarters, the board of directors issued a statement announcing an internal investigation. The man in the red tie disappeared from the company's website. Her stepfather stopped answering his phone. Emma watched it all from the motel room, sitting by the window with her knees pulled to her chest. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just watched. She knew this was only the beginning. Now they would fight back. Now they would spin stories, hire lawyers, deny everything. But for the first time, she wasn't alone. Ben began walking with Buck each morning. The old dog had taken to him quickly, as if recognizing something familiar in his step. He didn't try to reclaim what he lost. He didn't fill the room with apologies. He just made breakfast. He asked if Emma had enough paper for drawing. He took out the trash before she had to be asked. She noticed it all. She didn't speak of forgiveness, but she no longer drew faceless men. Now she drew moments. Her father's hands, Walter's back as he stood on the porch, the way the three of them fit in the same frame. 3 days after the story broke, a surprise visitor appeared at the motel. She was 10, with dark hair and a small scar above her left eyebrow. Her name was Lila. Emma recognized her immediately, her stepfather's daughter from a previous marriage. Lila didn't speak at first. She just stood in the doorway, clutching a small plastic folder. Then she said softly, "I saw you on TV. You weren't in the video, but it was you, wasn't it?" Emma nodded. Lila stepped inside and held out the folder. Inside were drawings, not as detailed as Emma's, but clear. They showed a man shouting, a door locked from the outside, a girl crying in a closet. He said if I talked, we'd lose our house, that Mom would go to jail. I didn't know what else to do. Emma knelt beside her. You did everything right. You came. That's all that matters. Walter gave Lila a glass of water and called Helen. With Lila's statement and the visual records, the case became larger. Now, it wasn't just corporate crimes, it was domestic abuse, manipulation of minors, emotional terror masked as parenting. Later that night, Emma added a new drawing to her wall. 2 girls sitting side by side. Behind them, a storm cloud in the shape of a man. In front of them, the sun starting to rise. Walter stood beside her and didn't say anything. He didn't need to. On the 5th morning, Helen returned with a news clipping. Jensen Group executives placed under official investigation. She handed it to Ben. You're not a ghost anymore, she said. He looked at the headline, then at his daughter. No, he said, I'm a witness. Emma stood at the edge of the tall glass building like a soldier before a fortress. The headquarters of Jensen Group rose before her, its mirrored panels gleaming under the morning sun as if daring her to step inside. Her school uniform was perfectly clean. Her hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail. In her backpack were the tape recorder, a folder of sketches, and the signed confession from her father. Walter sat in the truck across the street, the window rolled down just enough to see her. He didn't call out. She had made it clear she wanted to do this alone. Ben had stayed behind in the motel. It was not his moment. It was hers. Inside the lobby, the receptionist looked up from her screen. Are you? She paused, recognizing the name Emma gave her. Wait here, please. Emma waited. She didn't fidget. She didn't check her watch. After a few minutes, a man in a suit arrived and led her silently to the elevator. They rode to the 12th floor in silence. The doors opened into a wide hallway, carpeted in gray and lined with abstract art that meant nothing to her. The man gestured toward a door. Inside. Emma entered the conference room. The air was cold, recycled, too clean. Her former stepfather sat at the head of the long glass table, legs crossed, hands folded neatly. Beside him stood the man from the photos, the partner, the one who had replaced her father. They both wore suits too expensive and smiles too sharp. Well, well, said the partner, the little ghost returns. Her stepfather leaned back in his chair, smirking. So, is this about the sob story going round? You came alone? No old man today? No crazy father from the desert? Emma didn't respond. She placed her backpack beside her chair and sat down across from them. Her hand slipped into her coat pocket where the recorder waited, thumb pressing against the red button. They didn't notice. You really think anyone's going to believe a kid? The partner said. We have everything we need. Lawyers, paperwork. Ben signed. He left. That's on record. Her stepfather added, "We gave him chances. He made poor choices. And you're just like him, always looking for drama where there's none." Emma remained quiet. The silence began to make them uncomfortable. Her stepfather frowned. "What are you even doing here? You think you can fix anything?" He leaned forward, voice rising. "You think dragging skeletons out of closets makes you brave? It makes you naive." His partner lit a cigarette and exhaled toward the ceiling. "Listen, kid, your father was weak. He couldn't handle pressure, couldn't handle success, couldn't even handle having a daughter. That's why he left." Emma tilted her head slightly, her voice low. "And you made sure of it, didn't you?" Her stepfather snapped. "Don't talk to me like that. You don't know anything. You were just a useless burden." He slammed his palm on the table. "You ruined him, you and your damn tears." Emma pressed her thumb harder. The recorder clicked silently. Then came the moment she knew would come. Her stepfather stood and moved toward her. "And now you're here, acting like a hero, but you're nothing. Just a little girl with crayons and delusions." He grabbed the edge of her backpack and yanked it. Emma didn't flinch. He raised his hand and struck her. A slap rang out across the glass room. Her cheek stung, her vision blurred for half a second. She didn't cry. She looked up slowly, meeting his eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "Now I have proof of verbal abuse and physical assault." The man froze. "What?" Emma reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the recorder, placing it on the table. She pressed play. The room filled with their voices, their insults, their laughter, their confessions, the slap, the silence after. Her stepfather's mouth opened. You can't." Emma stood up, brushing her skirt straight. "Don't worry," she said calmly. "The file is backed up. My grandfather is downstairs, and I have a lawyer waiting for this." Her former stepfather lunged forward, but the partner held him back. "You think this will ruin us? You think anyone will care? We'll bury it." Emma smiled slightly. "Then you don't understand the internet." She turned and walked to the door. No one tried to stop her. At the elevator, she pressed the button and waited. Her cheek still burned, but her hands were steady. She could feel the shift in the air as if something old and heavy had finally been pulled into the light. Outside, Walter was already standing by the truck. When he saw her, his face tightened. "Are you okay?" Emma nodded, not hurt, just confirmed. She held up the recorder. "They told me everything I needed to hear." Walter didn't ask to listen. He knew she would play it for him when she was ready. That evening, in the motel room, Ben listened to the recording. When the slap played back, he closed his eyes. His hands gripped his knees, his breath short. "I should have protected you." Emma looked at him. "You tried, but I did what you couldn't. And I don't hate you for it. I just wanted you to know that I made it." Ben pulled her into a hug. He didn't speak. His apology wasn't a word. It was the strength in his arms, the silence of a man who had finally stopped running. Walter watched them from across the room, then opened his diary. He wrote one line. She didn't need revenge. She just needed to be heard. The news broke fast and loud. At first, it was just a clip. 14 minutes of recorded audio uploaded anonymously to several legal watchdog blogs. Then it was quoted by a local journalist, then replayed on television. The voices of Emma's former stepfather and the executive partner echoed through headlines and commentaries. By the second day, mainstream media had picked it up. Headlines screamed betrayal inside Jensen Group and the voice of a girl who refused to be silenced. People didn't know her name. Emma had made sure of that. She didn't want her face in the papers. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted justice, and now it had begun to unfold. Walter and Ben stayed out of sight while Helen, the attorney, worked on gathering statements and submitting formal complaints. The recording was powerful, but Helen knew better than to rely on one piece of evidence. With Griffith's testimony about the forged signature, the old employee blogs, the contract copies, and Lila's drawings and verbal testimony, the case was now a thick file of ugly truths. The prosecutors began their investigation. Jensen Group issued a press release claiming they were deeply concerned and that a full internal audit was underway. But no one was fooled. The men behind the abuse had already disappeared from the company website. Lawyers for the executives sent their statements of denial and counterclaims. But none of it changed the fact that millions had already heard the recording and believed the voice of the girl they couldn't see. Emma stayed in the motel, going out only with Walter or Ben. Her days were quiet. She didn't celebrate, she read, she drew, she helped Walter cook, and every evening she added a new page to the wall near her bed, sketches, headlines printed and taped beside timelines. One sheet had the word "enough" written across it in red marker. One morning, Walter came in with a stack of letters. Fan mail of a sort. People had begun sending them to Helen's office. They weren't addressed to Emma. Most of them just said, "To the girl who recorded the truth." Emma flipped through them. Some were from kids, some from adults. One said, "I didn't speak up when it happened to me, but you did. Thank you." Emma put that one aside and kept it in her notebook. Ben had begun working on the old bookshelf in the motel room. It wobbled and creaked, but he tightened the screws and straightened the shelves. One day, Emma walked in to find him sitting with her sketchbook open. He was looking at a drawing she had made weeks ago, the one with the 3 figures on the porch and a bird flying overhead. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask if the bird was supposed to be him. He just kept staring. "I used to think I had to disappear to protect you," he said at last. "But I didn't protect anything. I just made it harder." Emma sat beside him. "You didn't break me," she said. "You just gave me a reason to get strong." Ben nodded slowly. "But I'll be here now, whether you need me or not." That evening, Helen came to the motel with news. The district attorney had accepted the evidence. A formal investigation was open. Charges were being prepared. Emma listened without speaking. When Helen finished, Emma asked only one question. "Do I have to go to court?" "Not if we can help it," Helen replied. "The recordings, documents, and witness statements are strong enough. We'll keep your name sealed. We can protect you." Later, Emma walked out to the parking lot and sat on the curb. The air smelled like hot concrete and dry leaves. Walter joined her with 2 plastic cups of lemonade. He handed her one without a word. They sat like that for a while. "You don't seem happy," he said finally. Emma shrugged. "I didn't do it to be happy. I did it because no one else would." Walter nodded. "But you still did it. That means something." Emma took a sip. "I'm tired, Grandpa. I just want this to end." Walter looked at her, really looked. She had grown since she arrived on his porch, not in height, but in presence. Her eyes no longer searched for exits. Her hands no longer shook when someone raised their voice. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out his old diary. He tore out a page and handed it to her. It was blank. "You should write the ending," he said. "You earned it." That night, Emma wrote a single paragraph. Not for anyone else, just for herself. "I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just waited. And then I remembered I had a voice. And a voice, even when quiet, can move mountains if someone listens. The next morning, reporters gathered outside the courthouse. Emma watched from the motel TV as Helen spoke. She used words like legal precedent and child bravery and systemic intimidation. Emma muted the sound. She didn't need to hear it again. The world was listening now. That was enough. The countryside welcomed them back with the soft breath of early summer rain. It was not a storm, not the kind of rain that scared or scattered, but the kind that fell gently, as if washing the past off the earth without asking questions. Emma stepped out of the truck and stood in the driveway of the old house, staring at the porch that once creaked beneath her uncertainty. The wooden boards were the same, the paint still peeling in places, the apple trees still not bearing fruit. Buck barked once in recognition, then returned to his sunny spot under the window. Walter turned off the engine and stretched slowly. Ben remained quiet as he gathered their things from the back. No one said, "We're home." It was understood. Inside, the house had been left tidy but unchanged. The same clock that never ticked, the same photograph on the wall, but something in the air was different. As Emma walked through the rooms, she could feel the difference in her steps. She wasn't a guest anymore. She wasn't a ghost. She was someone who had returned with her voice. That evening, as the rain slowed, Emma took a can of white paint from the shed and began repainting the faded letters on the wooden board above the porch. Graves House, 1971. She worked quietly, lips pressed together, her brush steady. Walter came out with 2 glasses of lemonade and watched her from the steps. "Do you want to call it something new?" he asked. Emma shook her head. "No, I want it to be what it was." But this time, with everyone here. Behind her, Ben was fixing the broken hinge on the front door. He didn't speak. He hadn't said much since they returned, but each nail he hammered, each screw he tightened, carried meaning. He was not trying to make up for what he had done. He was simply showing that he stayed. In the mornings, Ben rose early to make coffee and walk Buck. In the afternoons, he helped Walter repair the shed or carry firewood. In the evenings, he sat beside Emma and listened while she talked about her drawings or read from old books she found in the attic. He never once said, "I'm sorry." He never once said, "I owe you," but everything in his presence said it more clearly than words. On Emma's 13th birthday, there was no cake with icing letters, no crowd, no decorations, just the 3 of them sitting at the kitchen table with an apple pie she had baked herself, its crust uneven but golden and warm. Walter placed a single candle in the center and lit it. "Make a wish," he said. Emma closed her eyes for a few seconds. When she blew it out, Ben asked softly, "What did you wish for?" Emma smiled. "I wished that next year we'll still be sitting here. Same 3 people, no one missing." Walter sipped his tea quickly, turning his face slightly so they wouldn't see his eyes were wet. In the days that followed, Emma began writing, not just diary entries, but fragments of things she wanted to say but hadn't. She wrote conversations that never happened, letters she would never send, memories she wanted to keep before they slipped away. She also kept drawing. But now, her sketches weren't of faceless people or birds in cages. They were of afternoons on the porch, of her father sitting with a coffee cup, of Walter reading a newspaper with a magnifying glass, of Lila, who had sent a letter and promised to visit once the trial was over. One day, Walter passed by her room and saw the stack of pages on her desk. On top was a handwritten title, "Grown-ups Don't Hear." He picked it up carefully and flipped through the first few pages. Her handwriting was neat, patient. There are voices that don't need to be loud. They just need someone to pause and really listen. He put the pages back down and nodded to himself. She's not just healing, he thought. She's building something. That afternoon, Emma sat on the porch sketching a new image. Walter joined her with his tea and looked over her shoulder. On the page was a drawing of the house with 3 small figures sitting side by side on the steps. In front of them stretched a field of gold grass, wind curling through it. In the sky above, a bird was flying, not escaping, not fleeing, just soaring. Walter pointed to the bird. "Who is that?" he asked. Emma tilted her head. "It's me, but it's also Dad, and maybe a little bit you." Walter raised his eyebrows. "Me? A bird?" Emma smiled. "You opened the cage." Walter chuckled, then shook his head. "I just left the door open. You chose to fly." That night, they sat on the porch as the sun fell behind the hills. The air was still. The stars came out one by one. No one spoke. There was no need. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything they'd said without words. Emma leaned her head on Walter's shoulder, and he placed his hand gently on hers. The porch creaked. Buck sighed. Inside, the old clock ticked once. Just once. Walter went inside later and opened his diary one last time. He wrote slowly, carefully. No childhood is perfect, but if it is rebuilt with patience, love, and time, it can still become something whole, a summer worth remembering. He closed the book and placed it on the shelf. Outside, Emma stood at the edge of the porch, looking out into the darkened field. In her hands was a cup of warm water. Walter stepped beside her. "Is that tea?" She smirked. "It's the kind you like to make." He pretended to frown. "Then I guess I'll drink it." She handed him the cup and looked back at the field. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Walter nodded. "Sometimes to get home, you have to get lost first. And sometimes the path back is the one only you can draw. Sometimes to be heard, you don't have to scream. Someone just has to be willing to listen. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe. More powerful and unexpected stories are coming soon.